Well, today we celebrate the life of Swami Kriyananda, and we don't so much celebrate that he lived, but we celebrate the effect that he had on our lives. And if you think about your family, those generations who have come before you, you remember them, but some of them you knew, some of them you didn't know, some of them you only knew a little bit. And you think, well, how did this person affect me? Because when we live in the ego, pretty much we think about everything in terms of how does it affect me? But some people affect more than just me. Some people affect a much larger audience, and they don't just affect us in terms of things that we like and dislike on the surface, their personality, the good things, the fun things we did together, but they have an effect on the course of our lives. And Swami Kriyananda, his life has had an effect on the course of many, many lives. We don't even know how many, but many thousands. I'm sure that millions have been touched by him in some way. And so today we celebrate his life, and we're going to listen to a message by Nayaswamis, Jyotish, and Devi, the spiritual directors of Ananda International.
Hello, everyone. May 19th is the anniversary of Swami Kriyananda's birthday, and we have just finished dedicating the Moksha Mandir, which is the final resting place for his body, and is a place that will be a spot of pilgrimage for people for decades, perhaps centuries to come. People will come there to meditate, to feel the expansion of the grounds, the expansion of the building itself, but most important, the expansion, the joy, and the love of Swami Kriyananda. His life was such a testament of bringing divine qualities into this world. I would say that there are a couple of aspects in his life that are the most important to me, and I was with him, as was Devi, for our whole adult life for more than 45 years. But the qualities that were most important to me was his constant caring and kindness and love for everyone around him. Yes, he was a genius on so many levels, and he accomplished so many, many things. But the more important thing was that he was a channel for divine love, because his accomplishments, to a certain extent, had people look at him and say, oh, how wonderful he is. His love made them feel that they were accepted, cared for, and their lives were changed. We heard a story just a week ago of a man who was not a very deep devotee. He had a little bit of interest in the spiritual path, but he met Swami Kriyananda, and after that he cried for a week because his heart had opened up so much just from that brief contact. And so that was the most important thing. But the other aspect is that Swami didn't channel just a human love. Human love alone, personal love alone, can't accomplish what we saw, the miracles that we saw in his life. He defined himself as a devotee, as a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, and that was the core of his life. So he channeled love, he channeled kindness, but it wasn't ego-generated. It was divine love, divine kindness, that was an extension of that which Yogananda also channeled. And by being a point of light for the universal light, a point of love for the universal love, they had the power to change lives and, in fact, to uplift the whole world. So on this, his birthday, it is very good, yes, to remember him, but more to emulate him. So let's, as Jesus said, love one another. And as Master said, when I am gone, only love can take my place. Let's be a channel for that divine love to everyone we meet.
Hello. In Swamiji's wonderful autobiography, The New Path, in the first chapter, when he talks about his coming into this world and his childhood, he mentions, there's a sentence that always struck me with so much depth and power. He said, "I believe I came into this world fully myself." What does that mean? It means he came into this world self-aware. He came into this world with a great amount of inner realization, self-realization, developed from other lifetimes. But then he went on to say later in that chapter, "But I realized that the role I wanted to play in this lifetime, the way I felt I would be the most effective in helping other people, was just to be their friend. Not to be a great exalted teacher or a author, a writer, composer, all these things he did, of course. But as Jyotish was saying, the most powerful thing he did, and the role that he felt was the most spiritually helpful to others, and that I believe he felt the most comfortable in, was simply to be people's divine friend." And Jyotish and I had the remarkable blessing, for which I am grateful for every day, of spending a great deal of time with Swami, traveling with him around the world, watching him interact with people. And just as the children's song he wrote, all the world was his friend. Whatever culture, and he was blessed with great linguistic ability. We watched him in Europe speaking warm, colloquial German with one devotee, French with another devotee, Italian, all in the course of, one right after the other, sequentially. And because all the world was his friend, and people felt that. They felt exalted by that kind of friendship that is personal to some extent, but to a much larger extent, just God's love flowing to us. And in fact, most of Swami's letters that he wrote to people, offering them counsel or guidance, his salutation, or his closing, I should say, was always in divine friendship. And in fact, we've published a book of his letters, collected letters, called just that, In Divine Friendship. And so, as we celebrate his birthday, the day will come when all of us who knew Swami, we will be with him no more. We will be with you no more. Hopefully we will be with him. In fact, one of the last times we were with Swami, he was saying, well, I won't be around much longer. And then he looked at us and he said, and you're getting on too. You won't be around much longer either. And I thought, well, that's good news. And I look forward to that. But for all of us who knew him will one day be gone. And then the next generation and the next generation will have to be representatives of that beautiful quality of divine friendship. And so, in closing, the best way we can celebrate Swamiji's birthday, May 19th, the best way we can be channels for what he brought into this world is to offer him the gift to others of that quality of divine friendship that he lived, that he modeled for us, that he imbued within us. And if each of us, it's like a beautiful torch of divine light and love that's handed from one generation to the next generation, on and on and on, until the whole world is filled with that light of divine friendship and love. So, happy birthday to each of us, because the soul that is Swami Kriyananda is cosmically present now and can be reached within our own hearts when we attune to that vibration of divine love and divine friendship. Joy to you.
In the autobiography of a yogi, the very first line, the very first thing that Master says is that talks about the tradition of India and the guru-disciple relationship. This is where it all starts. And without understanding that particular subject, we can't fully understand the process of self-realization. Self-realization is not something that we can do on our own. It's not something that you read a few books and then you practice the formula in the book, and then in a day, week, a month, or a year, you experience oneness with the infinite. It's an incredible process. It's an incredible journey. And it takes, imagine when we look at nature and, ducklings. And the mother duck has got all the little ducklings going around, and, she's taking care of them. And so much of the story of life on Earth is about mother taking care of the child. And it's a huge task just to get a child, a human child, from birth to adulthood, that they should live, and then be able to interact successfully with life. This is a big challenge. Imagine the soul that's been journeying for, at minimum, hundreds of millions of years. That's the minimum through the creation. And at some point, the soul becomes so magnetized with the yearning to come home to God, to come back to universal love and joy. And that yearning draws a universal response, and that response is the Guru. And once that relationship is created, that is the relationship that leads to the soul's freedom from the wheel of death, birth, rebirth, this endless cycle of living in limitation and separateness from the divine. So, as it says in the Gita, God sends when the darkness rises and Dharma declines, God manifests. And one of these manifestations was Paramahansa Yogananda. And when we look at Master, we as Swamiji said, he was in awe of Master. He was fully accepted. He was in. You couldn't get closer to Master than he was during the time that he was there. But he was in awe of God, this God being, this God presence. It took him time to absorb and to cognize the vastness of the circumstance. But even in that short period of time, you could go back to the first time when Swamiji met Master and received him as a disciple, accepted him, and gave him the touch on his heart for a long time. From that moment, he was changed. And I really do think that, as Asha discussed in that earlier video, that Swamiji's life was such an incredible, it had a purpose. The purpose was to give us the example of a disciple who went through, it's easy to think, well, Swamiji accomplished so much, but he had many challenges. I never met anybody who was so sick all the time, physically. I mean, he just had one thing after another, but he never acted sick. He never acted like he had any physical problems. And he was always smiling. I mean, even when he was in later in life, he was in here in India and had pneumonia. He's in the hospital, and he's in the hospital, and the doctors come in and say, "Oh, listen, can you help me? My son is, got some problem." And Swamiji says, "Oh, sure." But he laughed and said, "Look, the doctor's asking me for help." And then the next thing, he's writing the Material Success through Yoga Principles course. You're supposed to be sick. Take the day, week, month off. You've already done so much. But it was his nature. It was his nature to fulfill the role, this great work that Master had prophesied that he would do. Great, not because he was great, even though he was great, but because of the greatness of the hearts that would be transformed through his efforts for generations to come. Kriyanandaji has left a legacy of ways that we can understand how to come closer to God. Through all of his writings, through his music, through his lectures. I mean, this is such an incredible physical, mental, even emotional legacy. But underneath that, there is a vibrational presence that is as real as we open ourselves up to experiencing it. Asha said that from the very beginning, she felt that inner presence. And I think that probably all of the people who came at that time and stayed for so many years must have had their own version of the same experience. Certainly I was one of those people, in that I felt something. I would describe it as my greater connection to God and Yoganandaji. Some power that he had, some magnetic essence that exuded from him that made me feel different, that made me believe that it was possible, that made me somehow act in new ways and in fresh ways. And this transformative power comes from our willingness to perceive it, our interest in it, our willingness to say, as Arjuna did to Krishna, "Teach me." When we give ourselves to that process, then the door opens and God can work the magic in our consciousness. And this is the way Swamiji lived. He was really so isolated in that he had no, the spiritual family that he grew up with rejected him. And we tried to be his family, and we were, but he had no peers. He had no one of his generation to talk to be with. And he accepted that circumstance. It's hard to nutshell, to put in a very short period of time there's so many ways that Kriyanandaji affected and continues to affect those who connect to God through the channel of his consciousness. I'd like to remember a quote that I heard him say once. He said, he was asked about, the subject was, in America, it's like somebody reads a book or two and then they go out teaching. They go out and suddenly they're not just an expert, but a guru. They have a little inspiration, they have a good meditation, or they take drugs, LSD or something, and they have some kind of experience, and then the next thing you know, they're gurus. And Swamiji said, everybody wants to be a guru. I would rather be a good disciple. And this is really in spite of the fact Swamiji never described himself as a teacher. He was a sharer. He didn't want to teach people, he wanted to share with people something that he had found so valuable. And this consciousness of caring in that very natural expression of divine friendship really was so much a part of, no matter who came, everybody was instantly part of the family if they were open to it. Some people couldn't handle it. Some people, they had their defenses up. Oh, maybe he's a charlatan. Maybe these people are going to try to get my money. Maybe it's not exactly what he says, so I better not believe in any of it. All of these fears, and then of course, in our enthusiasm, I was certainly guilty of this. The sharing of one's opinion on any subject, and even worse, every subject. This is the position of being a student. Mouth closed, eyes, ears, and heart open. And in our enthusiasm, sometimes we get carried away with our own we're excited about it. And so then we start talking about it, and we sometimes forget that it takes time for us to really absorb, to really, not just to intellectually understand some of the principles, but to integrate them into our consciousness in such a way that we're living them, not just thinking about them. Martin Luther King in America made a very famous speech, I have a dream. And when I think of what I'm about to say, he had a dream, but I had a dream. And in this dream, Swamiji was there. And I was observing him with a small group of people. And I was just there, and it was nice. But then Swamiji looked at me, and he began to laugh. And it wasn't that he was laughing at me. He was laughing. And I'm sure that the laughter was part of the conversation that was taking place, which was so common. It would be very uncommon to have a conversation with Swamiji that didn't include laughing at some point. But when he laughed, because Swamiji always laughed with his spirit, he didn't, I don't know if you know this word, guffaw, where you laugh with your ego, and it's all very outside of yourself. Swamiji laughed with his heart, with his soul. And you could feel this sense of communion in his laughter. There was never, Swamiji didn't have a mean bone in his body, as we say. He just was the kindest person. And so even we could laugh at any silly thing that people would do. He loved P.G. Wodehouse and all of the characters that were created in those writings. And we were laughing at the foibles of human nature, not at a person, but at the nature of man to be so silly. And it's quite humorous, and he loved to laugh, but he laughed with, not at. But it wasn't just entertainment. It wasn't just, I enjoy laughing, this is a pleasure. It was a soul expression. It was a way of channeling God's joy. And when we laugh with God's joy, when we live with God's joy, when we live in every way with God living through us, this way of laughing is one of the ways that we can learn how to do it. We think of, I've got to practice my meditation. Practice your laughing. Laugh with this inner connection. It's one of the greatest things I ever learned from him. Seriously, to laugh in your soul, untouched by the excitement, and so that there's no residual emotional dam. And Master could, Swamiji often said, Master could make people laugh and they just rolling in the aisles is what they called it. But then, when he looked into Master's eyes, there was that stillness. Underneath all life experiences, there should be this inner stillness, this quiet connection to Spirit. When we can live this way, then we will make Swamiji proud. This is what all he wants from us. Not that we should even be perfect in it, but that we should seek perfection in it. That we should make it our priority. That we should dedicate ourselves to it. Because if Swamiji were to look at his life and say, I wrote a book or built a building or, cultivated the property in some way, without the spirit that has been transformed through those activities, it would have no value. If he had created a corporate structure and he had this many international branches of the business and we were, all selfish people seeking only money, he'd think, wow, I pretty much wasted that lifetime. But when he sees these hearts, when he sees souls that are opening up to God's presence, dedicating themselves to the light as they feel inspired. The Swamiji was never someone who said, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do. He invited people to participate. Just in the way that he shared, he wanted to, the teachings, he wanted to share the opportunities of service, the opportunities of attunement that come through service. Through conscious service, no matter whether it's washing the dishes or setting up the chairs or doing anything, when we act consciously in service to God, then we are acting as God's instrument. And as we practice that, we become better and better at it. Purer and purer expressions of the divine. So I celebrate Swamiji's life because I believe that he's free. And I'm happy for him. But I also celebrate his life because of all the good things he did for me. I mean, when I look at the Ananda spiritual family and I see the opportunity that God has given us through it, it makes me happy. Yes, I personally, I'm happy. But I'm also happy to see that his efforts are bearing fruit. That this family is growing in spirit. And in that, as Swamiji was saying, in that video, I don't think he was, yes, he was speaking to that specific group of people. I'm proud of you all. But I think that those kinds of statements can be, many generations down the road. That Swamiji clearly did not live just for the people that he met in his life. He lived for generations of disciples to come. He set an example for us. He gave us so many tips and tools and understandings about how to be more successful in our own lives. And he gave us a family to live and serve and love God with. This is the greatest gift, really. Having an environment that supports our spiritual aspirations. So today we celebrate his birth, his life, and spiritual family. And the grace that the Masters of Self-Realization and Yoganandaji have given to us. And so, let us be thankful.